Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to my presentation. My name is Anne-Marie McKinley. The topic of my presentation today is the theme of choice in literature. Today, you will learn something about yourself when you make important connections between the life choices you make and the life choices of the characters in Jane Austen's romantic era novel, Pride and Prejudice. We're going to talk about three things. These are, firstly, the Romantic literary period. Secondly, the historical time period in England known as the Romantic era. Finally, we're going to look at a hero in the literature Pride and Prejudice, authored by Jane Austen in the year 1813. Due to the limited time I have, 3 to 5 minutes, I request that you save your questions for the end of my presentation. Firstly, I will summarize the literary period. Literature in the British English Romantic period from 1798 to 1832 valued imagination, freedom of thought and expression, and idealization of nature. Noted writers included John Keats, Jane Austen, and Mary Shelley. Now we will move on to the second point, which is about the historical period. The Romantic period in England was a time and place when class lines were drawn clearly and they were rarely crossed. Men ruled the country and controlled the money. Society was ruled by very strict rules, and breaking the rules could result in ruin for the offender and her family. Ruined women lost all hope of marriage. Marriages were rarely arranged, but the social rules dictated that marriage took place within class boundaries. So, to be considered as a marriage partner for a wealthy noble, one first had to get an invitation to the ball. What would you do if you had a chance to take $1 million job, but you knew you would never like the job? Would you take it? What if turning down the job meant that you might never get another job offer? Now would you take it? That's what it was like for choosing a husband for a young woman in the historical English Romantic era. Lastly, I will move on to the third point, which is about Mr. Darcy as a literary hero in Pride and Prejudice. Mr. Darcy possesses many of the characteristics of a classic literary hero, two of which will be discussed here. Firstly, literary heroes are men of action rather than men of thought, and they live by a personal code of honor. When Mr. Darcy saves Lydia Bennet from social ruin by finding and paying the scoundrel Mr. Wickham, who has ruined Lydia, he does this not to impress Miss Elizabeth Bennet, the woman he loves, but simply because his code of honor demands that he do it. The second heroic attribute that Darcy shares with the literary hero is that heroes are surrounded by noble peers. Darcy surrounds himself with those he considers noble, which, because of his class prejudice, means the wealthy, elite, upper class known as the nobility. The transformation that occurs in him when he falls in love with middle-class Elizabeth occurs not because he wavers from his conviction to surround himself with noble peers, but that his definition of nobility changes as he comes to define nobility outside of society's rigid definition of the term, and he extends the definition to noble character, which he comes to greatly admire in Elizabeth. That's all for this point. In conclusion, in this presentation, my objective was to help you discover something about yourself in the choices made surrounding the literary hero. Have you considered how decisions you make now can have far-reaching consequences to the rest of your life? How good decisions made with careful consideration to love, consequences, and ethics can forever change the course of your life for the better? You are not in romantic 19th century England, where a husband is the only conduit to wealth, security, and happiness. So you have so many more choices than Elizabeth Bennet. But if you trust your heart and your moral compass and Consider the far-reaching ramifications of life choices. Perhaps you will attain the life of your dreams. I have covered 3 main points. Firstly, I outlined the British English Romantic literary period. Secondly, we talked about the historical era. Finally, we discussed Mr. Darcy as a literary hero. I hope you have found this presentation useful. Thank you. Questions, please? If there are no questions, that is the end of my presentation.